I was paying for a simple grocery run, bread, milk, a small cake, when the cashier suddenly froze. He looked at my card, then at me, and whispered something that made my heart stop. "Ma'am, if your son's been helping the parks, tell him to stop." His voice was low, urgent, like he'd said something he wasn't supposed to. At first, I thought he'd mistaken me for someone else, but then he said my name, Ruth Calder, and the way he looked at me, it wasn't gossip, it was warning. I left the store shaking, the receipt trembling in my hand. Outside, cold air hit my face, and that's when I saw her. Marla Park, my son's soon-to-be mother-in-law, loading trays of catered food into a brand-new SUV, the same family who'd told us they were broke, living on donations. The cashier's words echoed in my head, "Check who you're really paying." So I hid behind the carts, waiting, watching, because if what he said was true, I'd soon know it, with my own eyes. And that moment, that single choice to watch instead of walk away, would change everything I thought I knew about my son's family and about myself. I simply stood behind the cart corral and watched. Marla moved with the brisk confidence of a woman who was never told no. The catered trays were labeled with a downtown company that does holiday galas. I've seen their van outside the courthouse in December, just before the county Christmas luncheon. It was too nice a setup for the story I'd been told. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my son. "We're heading to Mom's Hope dinner at the clubhouse. Come if you want. Jade says there's pie. Jade is his fiancée. She has a careful kindness, like a nurse finishing a shift. She grew up with Marla. Sometimes that's all you need to know about a person, where they learn to breathe." I drove home with the chicken cooling on the passenger seat. I'm 68 and retired, but there are habits you don't retire from. I put the chicken on a plate, made a quick salad I didn't really want, and opened the brochure. Smiling Elders, a child in a hand-knit hat. The word dignity floated like a soap bubble over paragraphs that never seemed to land on a number. Suggested donation, as lead. If you have to write as lead on paper, it's because the paper is doing all the leading. I set my wooden gavel on the table beside my plate, the one a judge gave me on my last day as a family court clerk. It's small and smooth and fits my palm like a prayer. I tapped it once, not to make a sound, but to feel the weight settle. I ate a little chicken, drank tea, put on my better sweater, and drove to the clubhouse. The Hope dinner was warm, tasteful, and just a little too glossy. The front hall had a wall of framed photos, smiling volunteers, quilts draped just so, a check presentation that seemed to float off the glass. The din of conversation carried the soft, steady pitch of the Midwest in November, when people are both tired and grateful and trying very hard to be both. "Every dollar keeps our elders warm," Marla told the room from the little portable stage, her voice sliding into the corners like a pleasant scent. She wore a wool dress with a collar that made me think of holly ivy, and a necklace with stones that caught the track lighting like they'd been asked to. She thanked donors without naming them and talked about how discretion matters in small towns because some people prefer to keep their generosity private. People nodded. It's a good line. It makes everyone in the room feel like a secret saint. Daniel's hand found mine under the table. "Isn't it something, Mom?" His face carried that peaceful, open look he's had since he was 6, and built a ramp for a stray cat out of 2 shoebox lids and a book about trains. He is a good man in a world that depends on good men to keep it from cracking. After dessert, I helped stack chairs. The clubhouse rental receipt lay face down on a clipboard by the coffee urn. I only needed the corner, HOA log, due net 30, to feel my chest go a little tight. The newsletter last month said the parks were behind on dues. I remembered because Lucinda, our treasurer, had underlined 3 words in red and written please on the envelope. On my way out with Daniel and Jade walking ahead, I heard the soft whoosh of a sub-zero fridge as someone opened it in the kitchen. I know that sound because the county executive used to have one wheeled into the break room every December and set to show off how quiet cold can be. It's a strange skill, knowing your appliances by ear. But when you spend 30 years in the same building, you learn everything by ear. "Do you want to come over for a nightcap?" Jade asked as we reached the door. Her smile reached for mine without forcing it, which is a neat trick if you can manage it. "Another time," I said. "I'll just get in the way tonight." "You two enjoy." On the drive home, the sky was a thin blue slate, the kind winter lays down when it's tired of pretending to be anything else. I put my gavel back on the table when I walked in and wrote 3 words across the top line of a yellow legal pad. "Check the receipts." The next morning, I took a plate of shortbread cookies to Lucinda Hale. Lucinda is 74 and keeps ledgers like pioneer women kept diaries, with blunt honesty and no patience for foolishness. Her handwriting looks like it could march across a page without stopping to drink. "They're a month behind on clubhouse fees," she said, flipping a page and bringing her finger to a line. "Yet they've had 3 events. Lovely centerpieces. Those cost money, Ruth. I priced them once for the seniors' dance and nearly had to call the bank to recover." She poured coffee for both of us and set a folded HOA newsletter on the table. The bulletin board in her kitchen had a paper calendar with 5 birthdays circled and a small clothespin holding a bill from the plumber. There is a kind of order that makes you feel safe without anyone telling you to. "Have you ever seen a tax letter from them?" I asked. "You know, those donation summaries at the end of the year with the nonprofit's number and all that." Lucinda pressed her lips together. "I've seen thank you notes with adjectives. I haven't seen a number at Evergreen Market later that afternoon. I found Evan in the cereal aisle, straightening boxes. He looked like a man who engraves numbers on the back of his eyelids before bed. He took his cap off when he saw me, then put it back on the same way some men open a door for you and step through last without believing they are doing anything chivalrous at all. "I did books for a year before this job," he said, before I could think of a gentle way to ask. "Their people buy premium items as supplies the day of benefits. Then they talk about how much donors freely give. It's a funny thing about freedom. It's only freedom if both sides can see it." He reached into his apron pocket and handed me 3 crisp strips of thermal paper. "Training copies," he explained, "printed when a new cashier practices voids. Bulk imported goods, artisan desserts, coffee beans with tasting notes that sound like poetry if poetry lived in a cup. Each stamped charity event supplies." "I keep thinking of my mom," he said. "She gave and gave." I learned too late that giving isn't the problem. It's who holds the bucket on my way out of the store. A little gust of wind made the automatic doors stutter. I tucked the training copies into my bag beside the brochure and walked across the lot with my chin tucked down and my eyes up. I am not a suspicious woman. I am a woman who knows that paper is the one thing that can't lie by accident. The county building still smelled faintly of floor wax and old toner. The public terminals, where you can look up business filings and deeds, had that tick-tick hum that tells you the monitor is as old as the tile beneath it. A young clerk with nail polish the color of cranberries showed me how to scroll through the Secretary of State's records when the scroll bar refused to move. PFC Services, LLC, registered 3 years ago. Park Family Care Foundation, a nonprofit registered last year. Same mailing address, different registered agents, 1 annual report overdue. A DBA, Warm Hands Fund, filed then canceled after 6 months. I took out my phone and snapped screenshots in case the internet decided to forget what computers love to forget. I went home and lined my binder with tabs the way other women lay out quilt squares. Names, dates, addresses, fees paid, fees not paid, pictures of signs. I printed the brochure. I printed a picture of Marla beside a quilt with a caption that said, "Warm hearts for warm hands," and felt maybe a little older than I had that morning. That evening, Jade sat at my table and pressed both palms around a mug of tea like she was coaxing warmth out of it. She looked tired in a way that is usually called pretty by people who don't know how to see tired for what it is. "Mom says discretion matters," she said, twisting her engagement ring back and forth. "Some donors don't want names on letters. They want to help quietly." Discretion, I said, is not the same as lack of documentation. You can be quiet and still write down the truth. Jade looked at me with the wet glass eyes of a girl who learned early that love is quiet and costs you anyway. I wanted to take her hand. I wanted to shake her. I did neither. When you're my age, you learn that the right thing to do is sometimes to sit so still the other person can hear themselves think. I went to bed with the binder on the chair and my gavel in the drawer. I slept like paper, flat and unrumpled and full of ink I could not unread. The next day, I asked Marla for a tax letter. I sent the request in an email that read as polite as a church announcement and as specific as a weather alert. I wrote that my son wanted to keep supporting the work, but needed a year-end summary with the foundation's EIN for his accountant. If a house is built right, the walls do not mind when you lean on them. A week later, an envelope came, pale gold with my name in a script that hoped to be remembered. Inside was a thank you card with adjectives like warm and faithful and generous. There was no EIN, no non-profit language, no acknowledgement of quid pro quo. There was a signature that looked like it had practiced being elegant in mirrors. "We value your heart," it said. "The IRS does not process hearts." I set up a donor onboarding visit. Marla liked that phrase. It made things sound formal in a way that made people forget to ask for actual formality. Her office was down a hall lined with photos of people kneeling beside elderly folks on porches and offering blankets the color of pumpkins. The suite door said PFC Services in a font that wanted to be stainless steel, even though it was printed on vinyl. The brochure said Park Family Care Foundation. I took a picture of the door. I took a picture of my hand on the doorknob. The way victims take pictures of themselves in the mirror to prove they existed correctly at the time. "Transparency is the highest form of warmth," I said when we sat down, and Marla smiled the way people do when a dog tricks them into petting it, because they feel good and never realize who did the tricking. "We route support through PFC Services, LLC, to handle operations," she said, folding her hands on the table as if to bless the sentence. "Then grant to Park Family Care Foundation. We learned that from a consultant." Best practice, I nodded as if I didn't know that best practice is the second saddest phrase in the English language, right after you don't understand. I asked for a donor packet with EIN, board list, last year's 990. A legitimate nonprofit keeps those by the door like umbrellas. People grab them when the weather turns and no one complains. "Of course," she said. "I'll have my bookkeeper send them." We both knew that was a promise with no bones in it. I walked out into a wind that pinched my cheeks pink and said the names of the entities out loud the whole way to my car. Sometimes you have to hear a thing to feel how wrong it sits in your mouth. PFC Services, LLC, Park Family Care Foundation, Warm Hands Fund. Each one left a taste like pennies. I boiled water that night and watched the steam lift from the kettle in a slow silver line. I am not a detective. I am a woman with a little wooden gavel and a long memory for forms. I do not spy. I save. Daniel came by late after a service call in a neighborhood with old maples and new fences. He looked younger than he had at dinner, the way men do when they've used their hands to make something quiet behave. "How's Jade?" I asked as he pulled up a chair and reached for the cookies. "She's fine," he said, and then he wasn't. "She's worried about money." "Not us, just in general. She hates asking for help. She told me she thinks I'm the only person who's ever said yes without wanting to be thanked for it." "You shouldn't be thanked for what you should be," I said, and he smiled. "Mom," he said, "you make love sound so boring." "Then you've never been loved correctly," I said, and we both laughed because it's easier than crying over a sentence like that in the kitchen. I didn't show him the binder. I didn't mention the letter. I wanted to. I wanted to hold up paper and say, "Look how clean this is. Look how dirty this makes me feel." But if I came at him with it, he would see me and not the paper. He would defend what he loves, even if it meant defending what hurts him. That week at the county building, I printed the past 2 years of filings for both entities and slid them into page protectors. The first thing a man does when you present him with a protected page is stop trying to crease it. I printed the HOA invoice and Lucinda's newsletter and the flyer for a Hope dinner with a picture of pies I knew were from a bakery that does wedding cakes. I also printed a list of items donors should expect from a nonprofit if they plan to deduct their gifts. It wasn't because I thought I'd force anyone to learn anything at my kitchen table. It was because the last time I had this feeling in my bones was when a sweet youth pastor sat in front of my old desk and told me his wife's cousin had started a foundation to feed the hungry, and the paperwork said it was a men's softball league. The binder lay on my sideboard like a gentle threat. I'm not proud of those words, but they're true. Some things sit in a room the way thunder does. You can pretend not to hear it until the dog hides under the table and your own chest feels hollowed out by weather. The day the text woke me, it was 2:11 a.m., which is a time both sacred and vulgar. People are born at that time. People die at that time. People make calls at that time because they can't bear to wait for the sun. Mom, I got a credit alert. Store card attempt in my name. The address auto-filled to Park Office Suite. I stared at the blue light of my phone and felt not shock, but clarity. When you read enough affidavits, you stop being surprised by the shape of harm. It comes in the same 5 or 6 containers dressed up in new ribbon. After a minute, I dialed Detective Nia Morales, a woman who came to the courthouse last spring to give a talk on elder fraud and had the good grace to say ma'am to every grandmother and sir to nobody who didn't earn it. "I'm sorry to call you at this hour," I said. "I'm Ruth Calder. We met when you spoke to the court staff. I have a binder you'll want, not because it's clever, because it's tidy." "We've had complaints," she said, her voice steady even in the middle of the night. "But nothing clean enough to hold. If you have a chain, Ms. Calder, bring it." I set the phone on the table and walked to the sideboard and lifted the binder the way you lift a child from sleep, careful not to startle. I added Daniel's screenshot of the credit alert and printed the little map pin with the office suite and the street that I could have driven with my eyes closed. By morning, the sky had gone hard and blue. I wore my good wool coat and a red scarf I saved for days when the air wanted to bite. At the station, Detective Morales didn't say good job. She said, "This will get eyes." It was the best thing she could have done for me. Praise threatens to make you proud. Eyes make you careful. We agreed I would have one conversation with Marla in my presence and Daniel's, with Jade there if she wanted, and that I would speak plainly but without accusation. The detective would not be on the call as a cop. She would be a donor who wanted to be sure. Sometimes the simplest act is the one that gets the right words to fall out of the wrong mouth. By noon, I had texted Jade and Daniel and said I'd like to stop by after dinner. I bought a pie, blueberry because it tastes like truth even when you don't deserve it, and set it on the passenger seat. The crust cracked like an elbow as I carried it up the walkway and told myself I had come too far to do anything but be careful. Marla greeted us at the door with cinnamon in the air and a smile on her lips. The kitchen island gleamed the way pretty stone does, like it's proud to be useful. Jade stood by the fridge, arms folded the way women fold arms when they need the bones under their skin to hold them up. "I brought pie," I said, "because even the obvious can be a small mercy." "Lovely," Marla said. "We don't need to stand on formality today, Ruth. We're all family." "Then we won't," I said, and set my phone face up on the counter. "I have a few simple requests. I'm sure you get them all the time. Year-end letters so my son can deduct his gifts, your EIN, your last 990, a current board list, a receipt that names the foundation when the monthly support goes to the LLC." She smiled too quickly. "Ruth, you know how these things are. Paperwork lags behind impact. Impact is measured," I said gently. "That's what receipts are." Measuring love so the next person trusts it, I pressed the button and put the call on speaker. There was a click as the line connected. Detective Morales didn't announce herself. She didn't need to. Today, she wasn't a detective. She was a donor named Nia, who had heard about a good cause and wanted to be sure her warmth had a door to walk through that wasn't also a hole in the floor. I read filing numbers, dates, the HOA invoice line, the Instagram posts with centerpieces that cost enough to feed 3 families if you shopped in my part of the store and not the part with the round cheeses in netting. Marla's mouth moved through the shapes of bookkeepers and consultants and discretion. Then it did what mouths do when lies run out. It told on itself. "It's not personal," she said, and the cinnamon in the air turned into something bitter. "It's funding." Jade made a small sound, the kind humans make when something dear gets its last layer of pretty peeled back. Daniel's hands, my boy's good hands, pressed flat on the counter as if he could keep the whole house from sliding off its foundations through sheer decency. "That's a sentence," I said, not loud. "It's also a confession." "We help people," Marla said, color rising high and fast along her throat. "Do you think quilts pay for themselves? Do you think the heater says thank you when we feed it? Do you think donors want us to be poor just to prove we're honest?" "They want you to be accountable," I said, which is its own kind of honesty. The back door opened and Evan stepped in with his hat in his hand, like a man who'd come to read a meter. No one wanted read. He had asked to come, not to hurt anybody, but to say his part and be done with it. "I worked 2 weeks for you," he said, looking at the countertop, not at Marla's face. "Bookkeeping. You asked me to code donor reimbursements as supply purchases. I told you no. You told me to consider if I was a good fit for a mission-driven team. That's not true," Marla snapped, quick and brittle. "We pay vendors. We pay for supplies. Everyone knows that it's the mix that matters," I said. "It's always the mix." Detective Morales cleared her throat on the line, soft but present. "Ms. Park, I'll need to see your books." She let the words sit there like a cloth laid over the cage of a bird. The kitchen changed shape, not suddenly, precisely. Jade set her mug down so carefully you would have thought the counter was a lake and the ceramic was a boat she didn't dare tip. "Mom," she said, face turned toward the fridge like it might tell her something true. "Did you apply for a store card in Daniel's name?" "That's absurd," Marla said, the word absurd stretching at the edges like paint on a cheap sign. "People drag our name through mud every year around the holidays. Jealousy. People hate a woman who builds something that lasts." "Paper builds," I said. "Mud just shows up when you step where you weren't invited." "Jade," Daniel said quietly. "Did you know?" Her face folded. She shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again, as if truth were a coat that didn't fit no matter which arm went first. "I thought, some of it," she whispered. "Mom said it's how nonprofits survive." She said, "I didn't understand grown-up money. Every time I asked for numbers, she told me I was being ungrateful. She said, you wouldn't understand either. I understand." I said, not unkind. "You just learn to be quiet around it." Marla put both palms on the island and leaned forward like a senator during a hearing. "Ruth, you have never liked me," she said. "You don't like women who aren't small. You don't like women who aren't scared. You don't like women who won't ask your permission before they help people." "I don't like what I can't verify," I said. "I don't like help that eats the people who give it." Daniel exhaled a breath I'd been holding for him. "We're done," he said to the room, but mostly to himself. "We're done with money. We're done with cards. We're done with anything that doesn't leave a number behind." He turned to me like a boy who has broken a plate and expects to be loved anyway. "Mom, can we freeze my credit tonight?" "We can," I said, "and then we can eat pie." We did both. We froze his credit. We ate pie. The first bite was too sweet. Then it was right. I slept that night for the first time in a week and dreamed of a number that fit inside a box and didn't try to climb out of it. In the morning, the sky had softened and I felt my life slide 1 inch back into the kind of place where coats hang up straight. The fallout came like thaw. Ugly things climbed out of snowdrifts and had to be dealt with. Detective Morales took statements. The HOA got paid. Donors received letters with clean addresses and polite apologies not written by Marla. A woman from 2 streets over brought me a casserole, and we ate it cold over my sink like teenagers because it tasted better that way. Evan still works Register 4. He smiles a little easier now. He never asked me for anything, and I never offered him anything except shortbread every other Thursday, because some kindnesses aren't owed, they're simply right. Daniel called the credit bureaus and told each one the same sentence in a tone that had no space for argument. Freeze it. He canceled autopays with the kind of organized fury you only see when a person understands both what was taken and what was almost taken. He texted me a photo of a sunrise the first morning he slept through. There was no caption. There didn't need to be. Jade moved out of her mother's house and into a 1-bedroom above the rehab hospital where she took the night shift. She sent Daniel a copy of her new checking account with me, listed as read only. She said the words that make repair possible. I'll earn back each mile. I told her that I would walk some of them, but she would not be allowed to carry my bag. I sat at the lake on a Tuesday and watched 3 geese argue about a piece of bread as if heaven itself were inside it. I took the little wooden gavel out of my pocket and tapped it once against my palm. It doesn't make a sound to anyone but me. Sound is not always the point. Weight is. 2 months later, I got a call from a man named Strickland at the county office who told me there would be a public record of a consent agreement between the foundation and the Attorney General's charitable law section. It was dry as a saltine cracker and more nourishing. Restricted funds, restitution plan, board oversight, independent audit for 2 years. I hung up and let out a long breath and said thank you to nobody and everyone. Lucinda waved at me from her porch, where she kept a plant named Prudence. She stuck a note in my mailbox that read, in her Presbyterian print, "We should put your binder in the clubhouse like the defibrillator." I stuck the note to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a cow and laughed until I had to brace myself against the counter. Winter gave way to a false spring, then to a real one. My backyard maple did its slow trick, red to green like a sigh. I found myself a little kinder with store clerks and a little less patient with people who wanted me to prove I wasn't being rude by asking for the truth. When a charity jar by the register asked for a roundup, I still gave. I just asked whose jar it was and who counted the coins at night. Nobody looked offended. Most people looked relieved. Rules are blankets. They don't scratch when they fit. One afternoon, Jade knocked on my door with a stack of paper in her arms. Her hair was pulled back and her face had that sallow look the night shift gives you when you eat pudding at 3 in the morning and call it dinner. She set the stack down and pressed the heel of her hand to her eye. "Mom used to keep a ledger," she said. "I found it behind her winter sweaters. It's not with the official books, it's more like her handwriting, her way of thinking. She wrote phrases like discretionary transfer and earmarked sponsorship next to dates that match the days Daniel sent money. There are all these extra names that are just us. I wanted you to see before I gave it to Detective Morales." We sat on my couch and turned pages like we were touching a wound. The ledger was full of tiny arrows and little exclamation points that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't evil on the page. That's the cunning of numbers. They can be so clean you forget where the dirt went. "Was I complicit?" she asked, voice small and fierce at the same time. "If I knew and didn't know, am I guilty anyway?" "You were a daughter," I said, which is its own confession and its own absolution depending on the day. "I don't know how to be both," she said. "Then be one at a time," I said, and for once I didn't feel old saying something like that. I just felt accurate. I did what I could for her. I made her eggs. I wrote down 3 phone numbers on an index card: Detective Morales, a counselor I trusted, and a debt counselor who never used the word shame outside of church. I told her job for the next month was to sleep and not sign anything. I told her if anyone tried to make her feel rude for asking for a paper, she could text me and I would come stand beside her and look at the person until they realized they were the rude one. Daniel began keeping a budget like a person who had spent a winter learning the difference between hunger and appetite. He bought himself a pair of boots with soles that would last and laughed about how nice it felt to stand on something that was not pretending to be what it was. He replaced my refrigerator, insisting on paying for delivery and setting it up himself. "For years," he said, "I watched you count coins while I sent hundreds to people who didn't need them. It's your turn to have a door that closes and a light that comes on without rattling." I said thank you the way older women in my family always do, like it was a jewel we were embarrassed to accept and proud to wear. Then I filled the freezer with soup and told him if he wanted to be useful, he could change the smoke detector batteries because my shoulders didn't reach the ceiling anymore. 8 months after that first whisper at Register 4, I walked into Evergreen Market and found Evan breaking down boxes in the back. He smelled like cardboard and winter apples, and something else I couldn't place until I remembered the paper mill near the river where my father worked one summer when he was young. He saw me and smiled the kind of smile men smile when they have gone from being afraid they did the wrong thing to being certain they did the right one. "My mom used to say something," he said as we walked to the front. She said, "If it's worth giving, it's worth verifying." I never thought it would fit in a sentence I needed for my own life. I just thought it fit on her fridge. "Put it back on the fridge," I said. "Let the glue dry around it." Jade sent me a text later that week with a picture of her new schedule. Day shifts, 4 days a week. She added a picture of a budget sheet with 3 columns: groceries, rent, giving. The third column had a little note in her handwriting: "Ask for letter." I stared at it until my eyes stopped stinging. Sometimes I think about how close we came to not catching any of it. If I'd tapped my gavel at the wrong time, if Evan had kept his mouth shut because he was tired or worried or both, if Lucinda had decided to let the HOA dues slide 1 more month, if Daniel had decided that peace was better than truth, if Jade had decided to call me names I would have deserved, we might have slid right past the point where the ground gives way under the picnic blanket and everything you packed tumbles down a hill, dry sandwich and all. Sometimes I think about the ledger behind the sweaters, about how easy it is to dress up harm and put it in a drawer and tell it to wait until it's convenient to be looked at. I am not a woman who believes in convenient truth. Truth is water. It goes where it wants. You can hold your hand over it for a minute, but you'll have to come up for air eventually. One night in early summer, Daniel and Jade came over with a box of small fireworks, the cheap kind you can set off in the driveway without making the neighbors call the police. We ate burgers and corn that popped its sugars against my teeth, and we watched little fountains of colored sparks while the mosquitoes did their best to earn a living. "Do you think we can get married next spring?" Jade asked me when Daniel went inside to fetch more lemonade. "Or do you think it's too soon to ask for that kind of blessing?" "I don't bless because of time," I said. "I bless because of paper and eyes and promises kept long enough to become boring." "I can do boring," she said, and I believed her. "I know you can," I said, "and boring isn't dull when you've lived through what you have." "It's a quilt doing its job. I still love my mom," she said after a long silence. "I hate that too." "Hating what you love is a sign you are not done being honest," I said, "but it's also a sign you are walking the right way." Love has to be strong enough to say no. If it isn't love. We lit one last cone that sputtered blue and green and then surprised us with gold. I put my gavel in the pocket of my sweater and stood with my hands at my sides and felt for the first time in a year the kind of simple ease I used to feel when I left work on a Friday and knew I had 2 days to do nothing but make soup and talk to my neighbors about tomatoes. The next week, the Attorney General's office posted a 2-paragraph statement in a place no one but people like me ever look. It said Park Family Care Foundation had agreed to amended filings, independent oversight, and a restitution plan for misallocated donor funds. It said PFC services would be wound down and that any new entities would have to be disclosed in real time on all promotional materials. It said this is a reminder to donors to ask for verification. It didn't say thank you because the government doesn't, and it didn't say names because the law won't, and it didn't need to, because the point had been made in a language that mattered. In church, the following Sunday, our pastor preached about Luke and Zacchaeus and the mathematics of restitution. He said, if you took it wrong, you pay it back in a way that makes it obvious you know. Lucinda leaned over in the pew and whispered, "Obvious is my favorite kind of holy." I laughed loud enough that 3 heads turned and I didn't care. I am not a saint. I am a woman with a gavel and a binder, and a son who learned how to freeze his credit in one sitting. I'm a woman who still buys rotisserie chicken on Friday and sometimes forgets her reusable bags on purpose so she can line her trash can without thinking about it too hard. I'm a woman who believes that generosity is holy and boundaries are the ushers who seat it. Some nights, when the house is too quiet even for me, I open the binder and look not at the papers, but at the tabs. Red for filings, blue for receipts, yellow for letters, green for phone logs. It looks like a child's toy, something you could stack and topple for fun. It is not a toy. It is a map out of a place where people with good hearts get lost. The first time I saw Jade tuck a receipt into a small plastic sleeve in her own little binder, she looked up at me like she was asking permission to be a person who cared this much about paper. I nodded once, and she smiled, and then she cried in a way that made me turn away and pretend I was adjusting the blinds. The light wasn't that bright. Sometimes you close a shade so the other person can feel what they're feeling without an audience. Daniel likes to say we got lucky. I tell him luck is what you call it when you walk somewhere you could have driven. He has learned to accept that I will always answer like that and to love me anyway. He takes my trash to the curb on cold nights, and he never once has forgotten to bring the cans back up, which is the kind of devotion nobody writes poems about and everyone should. I don't know what excuses Marla tells herself when she looks in the mirror. That is not my job. My job is to make sure my son knows that trust is a door with a lock, and that asking for a key isn't rude. My job is to make sure Jade knows asking questions is a form of love, not a form of betrayal. My job is to bring Evan shortbread and to write Lucinda a check for the clubhouse floor polish and to text Detective Morales on her birthday, even if I have to call the station to find out when it is. People sometimes ask me whether it was worth it. The mess, the looks in the grocery store, the way the word meddling floated around my name for a while, like a moth that won't go toward any other light. I tell them that the first quiet night Daniel slept, that still, miraculous stretch of hours matters more than being called names by people who needed those names to feel better about what they wanted to keep doing. I tell them that after everything, I still put coins in jars. I just ask whose jar it is and who gets to count when the day is done. And sometimes, when I am tired and the world feels small and sharp, I walk down to the lake and sit on the bench that faces the little fountain, and I take the gavel out of my pocket and tap it once and say to the air, "Generosity is holy." But we don't hand the plate to wolves. The water never argues. It just keeps moving, the way truth does when you give it a path.